Hey nerdy nerds, today we are going to be carrying on with my mid-year content, moving into my reading stats for the year so far. So if you haven't checked it out already, I have already posted my best books of the year so far and my mid-year freakout tag, and I have both parts of my mid-year series check-in still to come. But today we are going through my reading stats, which is just essentially a numerical and graphical representation of my reading so far. We're going to be looking to see what trends we have, comparing these statistics to the statistics from the same point at last year, and seeing if there are any changes to my reading, and maybe talking about why that could be, if there is like a conclusion that we can come to there. So this is truly one for the nerds that like the stats. I know a whole ton of you guys just like numbers and graphs, and me too, which is why I make this video. I do not share my reading spreadsheet because my reading spreadsheet was not created by me, although it has been heavily edited. My spreadsheet is the one that Ali from Hardback Hoarder made from 2019, although she has newer, more advanced ones, and I've smushed G from Bookro's CAWPILE system into it, and also like edited it to tailor my specific needs. So I will link G's CAWPILE and Ali down below if you want to go check them out and make your own spreadsheet. I do not share mine, just letting you know, because I get questions every year. But getting straight into some stats. So we're going to start with the basic one. We'll start with the Goodreads Goal. Last year, okay, we all know, I talked about it a lot at the time, I still reference it occasionally. I had terrible mental health last year and it really affected my reading. The reason why I'm talking about this now is because I've actually read one less book at this point than I had at this point last year, but my outlook is very, very different. So last year I was like, my reading is terrible, I can't read anything, my focus is gone, I'm failing everything. This year I actually thought I was doing pretty well until I put these stats together and I'm like, oh girl, you're not doing as well as you thought you were. So my Goodreads goal for this year is 101 books. I've currently read 45, so I am behind. I should be at least on 50 books at this point in the year. I'm not too worried about it though, because I set my Goodreads goal to one book more than I read the year before. So I read 100 books last year and I was only on 46 books at this point last year, so I actually read more in the second half of the year than I did the first half. Also, May this year was the worst reading month I've ever had. I've only read 3 books, which was so little for me, and that's not a normal month. That was like extenuating circumstances, so that's not going to be a recurring theme like throughout the rest of the year. It was kind of just like one off month, you know? In terms of pages, I have also read less pages. I've read 18,440 pages so far this year, which is 1,154 less than last year, and this also indicates that the length of book that I'm reading is a little bit shorter this year, seeing as there's only one book difference. That doesn't really typically, unless it's the Stormlight Archive, doesn't account for 1,154 pages. So my books are a little bit shorter as well. So the first graph we're getting, and I'm going to move over a bit because I never do and I end up cramped, but the first graph we have is for, I've edited this one actually. So this is not the type of book that I read is essentially reread, standalones, first books in series, or sequels. Now this used to just be standalone series or rereads. I've split my series in 2 because I'm really intrigued, because I always knew that I read more series than standalones, but I want to stop starting new series and not continuing them. So sequels is something that I like actually want to track. So this year I've reread 1 book. 24% of the books that I've read are standalones, which is a 5% increase on last year. I really don't read that many standalones at all typically, but this year they're accounting for a quarter of my reading. And with the sequels versus first books in series, I've very consciously tried to balance it, and I have been successful, but only just. I'm surprised I've caught up. I wanted to balance it to 2 sequels per every series I started, and that is pretty much exactly where that statistic is right now, with 49% of the books that I've read being sequels and 24% being new books in series. In terms of books that I've read per month, normally this doesn't necessarily, so like the most amount of books I read doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best reading month in terms of pages. This year it actually does. So January is my best reading month with 10 books, and May is my worst with 3 books. The interesting thing about this, like I always read a lot in January because there's nothing much else to do in January except read. May actually apparently seems to be a recurring theme as my worst month, because these are my best and worst months of last year as well. Although I will say the reasons for me being really bad were vastly different. This year it was because it was my birthday, I went on holiday, I got engaged, so there was just a lot happening. Last year I think it was depression. But in terms of the star ratings, over the last couple of years we've seen my 3 stars creeping up to match my 4 stars. Previously my 4 stars used to be like the vastly dominant star rating because I'm typically picking up books that I'm going to enjoy. Not every book is a favourite, so not every book is 5 stars. A lot of them I like a lot and I give them 4. Over the last couple of years that has not been the case, and now we have got to a point where the 3 stars and the 4 stars are equal. I have been thinking and discussing recently about whether I personally, or we, but me personally, should DNF 3-star reads if you know they're not going to get any better. And it definitely depends on the book, because a 3-star thriller is not necessarily a bad thing as long as I'm enjoying it while I'm reading it, because I care about the atmosphere and the reading experience of a thriller more than I care about like the writing or the plot. But typically if I'm reading a fantasy romance and I know that it's not going to, like, nothing could happen in this book that could make it more than 3 stars, should I DNF it? I think that I should, because I'm not here for mediocre books. I'm here for 4 or 5-star reads, and I don't want to be giving my time to books that are going to be nothing more than mediocre to me anymore. So that is something I potentially want to be doing going forward, being a little bit more ruthless about DNFing the books that are very average to me, because actually I think that 3-star reads are truly the worst. Like a 1 and a 2-star read I can rant about and I have things to talk about. 4 and 5-star read obviously I really love. 3-star reads are literally nothing to me. So that's something that I want to maybe keep in mind moving forward. The only other real thing to note here is that we do have a 1-star read, and this is my first 1-star read since 2020. The last 1-star read that I had was Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera. So yeah, we've had the worst book I've read since. Actually, you know what? I didn't hate that book. It's just I actually liked nothing about it at all. So I felt like a 1-star rating was fair. I want to be shifting more towards using my time wisely on things that I enjoy instead of reading for the sake of reading. So for the demographics, we are still shifting more and more towards adult. We're at 80% adult books read now, which is a 4% increase on last year. And we are at 15% young adult, which is a 4% decrease on last year. So this is wild to me because it wasn't that long ago. Like in the time that I've been making these stats videos, this has shifted from almost 50-50 YA adult to a lot of adult and the occasional YA, which makes sense because I've obviously aged throughout the years, but it's probably the most dramatic change in any statistic across the entirety of this video is how it is a slow and steady progress to reading more adult books. And obviously it makes perfect sense. I'm not mad about it. I've also read like 1 middle grade and 1 new adult here. They are always very much the outliers, and it is adult and YA that always make up the bulk of this graph. For the formats, 56% of the books that I've read are physical, which feels low to me because physical is just like standardly formatted novels. Like it is just like a book that I read with my eyes. So for that to just be 56% seems really low, because what am I reading? Apparently I'm reading manga. I wasn't reading manga last year. I hadn't read a single one at this point last year, and right now I'm on 11%. I'm actually reading or listening to less audiobooks than I was at this point last year, which I thought that I was listening to more because I've come to appreciate audio a lot more. I'm very particular about narration. So audio is hard for me to listen to. It has to be the right narrator and the right book for me to be able to listen to it. I definitely appreciate audio for the times when like I want to do a jigsaw puzzle or something like that, but also listen to something at the same time. But apparently we're down 9%. For the standard books we're only down 2%, so kind of like negligible stats. It's like representative of like 1 book or something. Ebooks, pretty much the same as last year, once again just a 2% difference, and everything else is pretty much about the same. So less audio and less normal like standardly formatted books, and I feel like it's the slight increase that we've had in manga that represents this. When we're only talking about 45 books, it's actually like an 11% of manga is only actually 5 books, so I feel like it seems a lot more significant in a percentage than it does like if I held it up as like a stack of books compared to like the physical books that I've read. So for these genres, Genres. Fantasy is about the same. It has decreased slightly over the years, but that's only because I used to count fantasy romance as fantasy and then I gave it its own genre. So now the fantasy romance I was counting as fantasy is now like its own separate thing. So we're on 40% fantasy, which is standard. Fanro is exactly as it was last year. It's actually a 0.5% increase on last year, sitting at 22%. Now, there's a couple of things that are different in this graph. The first thing is that I've read 1 lit fic and 2 non-fiction, which are genres that I would say I almost never read. So I've been not necessarily slumpy, but I've been in a reading mood but wanting to read things that are a little bit different. So I've been picking up things that normally like you definitely wouldn't find me reading, and I've been enjoying doing that as well. But something that is like I feel quite dramatic in here is the fact that I've read 13% less contemporary romance than I read at this point last year. And I have to say, I'm not enjoying romance right now. I don't know why. I have a suspicion that it might be to do with my hormones and the fact that they have changed due to some medication that I've been put on to fix hormone problems that I had last year that caused all of my anxiety and depression. So if that is the case, that's going to be a problem. I kind of want to do a vlog actually to read like the best romances that I can find, like the ones that a ton of people love, and if I don't enjoy them then it's definitely me that's the problem, and I don't really know what to do about that if it is like if hormones are responsible. So let's hope that's not the case. I actually hope I've just been reading really bad romance recently, but I am just not in the mood. And as you guys know, like the majority of things that I read are heavily romantic. Like I love my fantasy romance, I love contemporary romance, I love a fantasy or a sci-fi that has a romantic subplot, but not right now. So maybe at some point in the future we'll put that to the test, see if I can find my love of romance again. But right now it's not really doing it for me, and I've been sitting on this theory for a while that it might be my hormones that are responsible. But I feel like I'm a little scared to dive into that, so we'll see what happens over the second half of the year, I guess. For the places where I've sourced my books from, 60% of the books that I've read have come from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of the year, and 27% of books that I've hauled this year. So they are the majority of this graph. I never know where I want this to sit because I want to be prioritizing books that I already own and not just picking up shiny new things, but I don't want to be buying books if I have no intention of reading them as well. So I feel like there's no good way for this to be split, although in my gut I feel like I want to be reading more books that I own. This is actually like there's only a 3% decrease on the own TBR section and a 3% increase on hold, so it is once again like kind of negligible stats and it's about the same as it always is. But I like the idea, I'm a completionist, so I like the idea of reading my backlist. So I feel like my gut wants me to have this skewed more towards own TBR, because there's no point having so many books if I'm not reading them, but at the same time why am I holding books if I'm not reading those either, you know? In terms of my TBR, I have put 33 books on TBRs this year, which is 4 less than I did last year, and I've read 29 of those books, which is 5 more than I read last year. Circumstances have changed since last year. I'm not doing Bookopoly TBRs anymore, and I'm also not making arbitrary TBRs for no reason, which is what arbitrary means. So the only things that I'm putting in the TBR part of my spreadsheet are book club books, and when I do Bookopoly vlogs, those books go in, Patreon picks. So all books that I'm definitely going to read. So those 4 books that are on my TBR that I haven't read are purely Patreon pick books because I'm a couple of months behind. This stat isn't as important as it used to be because I don't make Bookopoly TBRs anymore, so I'm not just putting like loads of books on TBRs and then not reading them. Everything that goes into this part of my spreadsheet will eventually be read. So all this is really signifying at the minute is that I'm a couple of months behind, which I am aware of and I don't need reminding. I also like to track whether the authors that I'm reading from are authors that I have read from before or whether they are authors that are new to me. There is also a debut section of this, which I absolutely never use, and I should, but I always forget that debut is a thing. I just look at the author name and I'm like, have I read from you before? No. Okay, you're a new to me author. But this is kind of like the own TBR versus hold. Like, where do I want to sit? Do I want to be returning to authors and like trying to complete their work, or do I want to be discovering different new stuff. And once again, the completionist in me kind of wants to be reading from authors I've read from before and continuing to explore their work and read everything that they've published if they're authors that I like. So this once again is just in terms of like personal preference where I want it to sit, but I think a 60-40 split is kind of decent. I will say that this is one of the statistics that I thought I was doing better at this year. Like I thought I was returning to authors I'd read from previously more than I was starting new things, but actually there's a 5% decrease in authors that I've read from before and a 5% increase in new authors. So yeah, not doing as well on that as I thought I was originally, but it's like, it's a meaningless statistic really. Like I said, it's personal preference. It's just not how I thought it was going. And then finally, the last thing I have to share with you is the publishing wheel, which I'm not going to go through the entire thing obviously because it's mental, but the majority of books that I'm reading are still self-published, or like that's the biggest percentage. I feel like as long as I'm reading indie books, it always kind of will be, because indie books are indie books and everything else is split between like all of these different publishers. So if we were talking about self-published or indie versus traditionally published, I'm actually reading a lot more traditionally published. It's just split between all of these different publishers. You know what I'm saying? But I actually have a 4% decrease on indie books this year, and that could be partially due to the fact that I'm reading less romance in general, and indie books, like the indie books that I read, do tend to be romance. Also, the traditional publishers have finally apparently decided that romance is a genre that's worthy of them and are buying up all of the indie published series, so that could also contribute to this as well. The most interesting thing about this graph for me is that when you take indie out of it, my top publisher that I typically read from is Harper Voyager, and that has been consistent the entire time that I've been making these videos. Voyager pretty much always comes on top. It may be tied with Galank sometimes, and I do tend to read quite a few like Orbit and Galank's books, and that's because those three publishers are probably like the top. There's Hodder as well, are like the top sci-fi fantasy publishers in the UK. I've only read one Voyager book this year, and I've just read it. I don't know what that's about. It's not something like, I don't go out of my way to read Harper Voyager books, although I do get their subscription now, so I should be in theory. But just out of the books that I've been reading, Voyager is not it. That could be because I'm reading Wheel of Time at the minute, and I'm also reading the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie, and neither of those are published by Voyager. So when I'm going into like my gritty, dense adult fantasy, it is authors and books that aren't published by Harper Voyager. But I just thought that it was interesting and also very unusual for me. So there we have all of my juicy mid-year statistics. This is a video that is very like, it's not super informative to you guys, I feel. I mean, it is in giving you an insight to what I'm reading, but it's not like you're taking recommendations from this video or anything. So like, it truly is a niche one for the people who love stats and numbers. But I do hope that you have enjoyed it. I really like, especially, I love stats in general. Sometimes, like when I finish a book, I fill in my spreadsheet immediately and then I scroll through the graphs to see how they've changed. I am truly that sad. So I get it. I love numbers and statistics too. So I do hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. Next up, as I said at the beginning, in my mid-year series, we will be focusing on series, and you will have both parts of my mid-year series check-in coming to you very soon, amongst all of the other like reading vlogs and stuff you got coming your way. So do subscribe if you haven't already and you're interested. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. I know I just said that, but I messed up my outro sequence, so I had to say it again. Down in my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. So that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.